Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are back with day 2 of the FIDE World Rapid and Blitz Chess Championship being held in Doha, Qatar. Now, after day number 1, there was a 5-way tie for first place, including Grandmasters Magnus, Carlsen, and Vladislav Artamyev. Now, in round number 6, the first day of the round, Magnus would make a draw against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave from France, and Vladislav Artamyev from Russia would get a very big win against Arjun Erigaisi from India. As such, that would put us in the situation for the game we're going to look at in round number 7 between Vladislav Artamyev and Magnus Carlsen, with Artamyev being the sole leader in the tournament with 5.5 points out of 6, and Magnus, as well as a few others, half point behind. So, round number 7, big matchup. Artamyev has the white pieces, and let's jump right into the action. So the game starts with the move d4, Magnus plays d5, we get c4, and now we have the move e6. We get knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, and Magnus decides to play this move c6. Now, all this is pretty standard so far. We have transposed back into the semi-Slav defense. Normally, the way this opening is reached is via c4, c6, knight c3, knight f6, knight f3, and e6. But of course, there are many ways to get there. So we get e3, Magnus plays knight d7, we get queen c2, and here we get the move b6. Now this move isn't necessarily dubious, but it's not considered to be the main line. Now, one of the things when you're playing rapid or blitz chess is that you can take more liberties, meaning that you don't have to be as precise with your openings because your opponents have to make decisions a little bit quicker than they would in classical games, and as such, precision is not going to be quite at the same standard as it would be for a classical game. Now, in this position, black usually plays move bishop to d6, but b6 is fine. We get pawn takes pawn, and now Magnus takes with the e-pawn. Now, it's very clear from Magnus's games on the first day that he is aiming to play stuff that's more on the dubious side, but keeps all the pieces on the board, and as such, gives him more chance to win because he doesn't expect his opponents to be able to play perfectly, and if he plays better than they do in the middle game and end game, he will continue to generate winning chances. Normally, c takes would be considered a little bit more solid. Magnus takes with the e-pawn, we get bishop d3, and now we get the move bishop e7. Now here Artamyev castles, we get bishop b7, and we get the move pawn to e4. Now, as you guys can tell from the evaluation bar, white is a little bit better here because black is a touch behind in development, and white very quickly has a lot of pressure on both of these pawns. So we get pawn takes, knight takes, Magnus castles, and now we get to move knight to e5. Now, one thing that you will notice here is that this game is a rapid game with 15 minutes and 10 seconds per move, but Artamyev is spending all the time in the world. Now, as we're about to see, this will pay huge dividends, but it's kind of crazy to see Artamyev spending 7 minutes on this single move here. He's already down to 11 minutes when he plays e4 to begin with, but when he goes knight to e5, he spends another 7 minutes, but this move is, in fact, the best move. Magnus trades, he goes knight takes knight, and here we get the move pawn to h6, saving the pawn from being captured on h7. Now, in this position, white is unable to take the pawn on c6 here because after rook to c8, the bishop is pinned here. If white moves the bishop, you lose the queen in the game. If you don't do that, say you move the queen, I take the bishop, I have an extra bishop on the board, and you will resign very shortly. So white can't take on c6. Now, as I was doing my live stream coverage of this game, I saw Artamyev's time continuing to tick lower and lower before he plays this move e6 with a minute 15 left on the clock. Now, when Artamyev plays this move, spending another minute 40, you see the situation here. Magnus is up 10 minutes on the clock, but this move is a very tricky move. And the reason this move is so tricky here, as we'll see, is that what Magnus usually would do is he would usually take the pawn, but here white will play bishop takes pawn on h6, and you're like, what's going on? Pawn takes bishop, and now there's the move bishop takes c6, attacking the bishop on b7. Now, if black were to play rook c8 here, trying to win this bishop, white has queen g6 check, and then white takes the bishop, and white will win the game. So the natural continuation would be to take the bishop on c6. However, after you take the bishop on c6, white can play queen g6 check, and the game ends in repetition with a draw here, as the white queen will permanently check this black king in between the two corner squares. So, when e6 is played, Magnus spends a lot of time here trying to basically weigh the odds of what to do. Ultimately, Magnus decides not to take the pawn and make the draw. Instead, he decides to play this move queen c7. Now, this shows why when you play chess, sometimes you need to be objective about your play, because Magnus decides to gamble on the time and thinking that Artamyev will make a mistake, and he instead is the one who makes a huge blunder with queen c7. Now, what I suspect Magnus would have played if he could do it over again was maybe a move like queen to e8, followed by queen takes f7, or maybe a move like queen to d6 here, and then pawn takes, rook takes. And there's one very big difference, which is that when Magnus plays queen c7 here and we get the capture, Magnus Carlsen, the 5-time world champion, one of the greatest players ever, overlooks the very, very basic move bishop to d5 here, pinning this rook to the king. And here you're unable to take the bishop because then you lose the queen on c7 and the game as well. So after bishop d5, Magnus plays rook to f8, and here Artamyev plays bishop takes h6, burning through most of his remaining 1 minute on the clock. However, with the 10-second increment here, Artamyev is never really in danger of losing the game, and this shows why gambling in chess is very bad. So we get bishop takes h6, Magnus plays bishop d6, Artamyev takes the rook, and now we get to move queen g6, pinning the pawn from capturing the bishop. Here Magnus takes on h2, we get king h1, and we have the move bishop to e5 being played. After bishop to e5, Artamyev plays rook e1, Magnus plays c5 here, trying to open up both of the diagonals for the two b's, and now we get to move pawn to f4. Now what you'll notice here is that black is losing according to the computer, but with Artamyev only having 20 seconds, if Magnus can just keep the game going long enough, there will always be opportunities to create a swindle opportunity. So we get bishop d6. Now, when I was doing my coverage, I thought bishop takes b2 was the last real chance to keep the game going, because if white plays the natural move rook to e8, rook to f8, and rook e1 here, now black can play queen c6, and with the two bishops and this 3-on-1 majority on the queen side with the pawns pushing, if queens ever come off the board here, say you get a position like this, suddenly the pawn is marching down the board with all these pawns on the queen side, black might even have chances to win the game. Magnus instead plays the move bishop d6. We get rook to e8, bishop f8, and now we get the move rook to d1, which Artamyev plays with 5 seconds left on the clock. Now, as you'll notice, this is a serious mistake from Artamyev, because Magnus plays the move rook to f6, attacking the queen here. We get rook d8, and here there's the move bishop to c6. Now, Magnus has plenty of time to find this, but seeing as how he hasn't been great throughout this game, he's already made a few blunders, it's very understandable that he misses it. Instead, he plays this move bishop takes g2. Now, had Magnus played the move bishop c6, the way the game probably would have continued was white sacks the rook, black takes, we got check, hitting the king. If you move the king, you lose the rook in the game, and after queen f7, takes, you get queen takes to h6, king to e8, and after the move a3, white has one extra pawn in this queen and pawn endgame, but again, with only 20 seconds left on the clock, who knows what would have happened. Instead, Magnus blunders with bishop takes pawn. Artamyev captures the bishop. Worth noting, by the way, you can't take the queen because this would lead to a checkmate with the two towers here, and the king has no escape square. So we get bishop takes pawn. Here, Artamyev takes with the queen, not the king, of course, because then rook takes queen would come with check on the king. So we get queen takes, rook takes, king g1, and now we get to move rook to f6. Magnus trying to guard the bishop, but after queen to d5 check, Magnus plays king to h7, but resigns before the next move, because here Artamyev would calmly take this bishop. The rooks guard each other. If you trade with a rook and a queen, threatening all these various checkmates, white will win the game. And if black were to play rook g6 check, you simply slide the king over to f1 here. The rook guards the pawn on f4, and again, there are simply way too many checkmate threats on the h file. So, in this position, Artamyev gets a very, very big win. This now moves him into a commanding position with a score of 6.5 points out of 7. Magnus suffers his first loss of the event. After the game ended, there was a little bit of drama. Magnus went and pushed a camera out of his face in sheer disgust after losing this game on his way leaving the playing hall. So the emotions were riding high. Everybody's unsure. Magnus very, very competitive, as we know. But there was this little bit of an incident that occurred. So Magnus loses this game. This means he's now on 5.5 points out of 7. Magnus, or 5 out of 7, I should say. Magnus would go on to end the day in typical Magnus fashion by winning the final 2 games and ending with a score of 7 out of 9, a half point behind the leaders. So let's move on to another one of the pre-tournament favorites, and that, of course, would be Alireza Firouzja, originally from Iran and now representing France. Now, a player we spoke about yesterday is this very young and talented 15-year-old junior player, Sina Movahed from Iran. Now, I know, again, I'm mispronouncing the name, but the name is just too good, and the memes sort of speak for themselves, so let's roll with the flow. So Sina Movahed is having a very, very good tournament. He suffered a loss to the reigning world champion Gukesh yesterday, but nonetheless, going into this game, both the players have 4 points out of 6. Alireza, after his really, really hot performance in the Global Chess League, is trying to claw his way back into the running. So in the 7th round game, we have Alireza with the black pieces, Sina move ahead with the white pieces, and the game starts with the move e4. Alireza plays his classic Najdorf defense here with pawn to a6, and now we get bishop g5. Here we get e6, queen to f3, h6, and now we get to move bishop to d2. Alireza plays queen b6, knight to b3 here. You don't want to hang the knight and the pawn on b2, so you bring the knight back, covering up the square, and there's nothing hanging any longer. So you get knight to c6. Here we get bishop to e2. Alireza plays queen c7, and now we get to move pawn to a4, trying to stop black from expanding on the queen side. We get b6, castles, bishop b7, and here we have the move queen g3 on the board. Now this looks like a very standard position, but there is one big issue here, which is that for Alireza, he's struggling to finish his development because of this pawn on h6 and this weak pawn on g7. If black were able to get a move like bishop e7 followed by castles, black would be doing completely fine here. But in this position after queen g3, you can't really move the bishop because you hang the pawn. You never really want to castle the king to the queen side, so Alireza decides to play this move h5, trying to be aggressive on the king side. We get to move f4, h4, queen h3, and now we get to move knight to a5. Now what Alireza is aiming to do here is he's aiming to attack in the center very, very quickly without finishing his development here. He's leaving the king on e8, but he's hoping down the road to either castle or move the bishop and then maybe castle kingside. So we get knight to d4. Now this is a move that's a bit of a bluff in a sense, you could say, but here Alireza plays bishop to e7, we get rook e1, and now we have the move knight c4. After knight to c4 is played, we get bishop c1, and here we have the move queen c5, pinning this knight on d4. Sina move ahead plays rook d1, and now we get to move rook c8. Worth noting here that you might be thinking, can't you go e5, pinning the knight to win the game? Knight can't move as you lose your king. But if you play e5, after pawn takes, white can go b4, sacking a pawn, you take, and after knight to f5 here, both the pawn and the bishop are under very, very serious pressure, and white has a commanding lead in the position due to the rooks and the king not being developed here. So we get rook to c8. Here we get king to h1, Sina move ahead dodges the threats in the center, and now we get this move queen to c7. Now what's amazing about this game as well is you can see that from the time usage, Sina move ahead is moving very, very quickly. He is not using a lot of time, and Alireza is the one who's getting low on time and under a lot of pressure. Now one of the moves that Alireza probably considered here was knight takes pawn on e4, but after takes in this position, white can play b3, attacking the pony. If you go knight to a3 here, there's a cute move pawn to b4 here, and now you win this knight on a3, and you win the game. And if black plays move knight to a5 here, you can go bishop takes a6, attacking the rook, bishop b5 check, and here there are probably many ways to win, but b4 is probably the cleanest because after takes, you have the move bishop to a3, and it's the classic uh-oh spaghetti-o moment with the queen getting trapped on the rim. So Alireza goes queen c7. We get the move bishop g4 here. This is a move that initially I didn't really like or understand, but Sina move ahead plays it. I guess his idea here was he figures he puts more pressure on the pawn on e6. If black does not trade the bishop, say you play a random move like, I don't know, like rook b8 here, white can probably sack the bishop, and after takes, knight takes, you fork the pawn and the queen. Now you have e5 here, and if black were to take everything off the board, you can now go rook e1. There's knight g7 incoming, and black has no development. All these pieces are on the back ranks of the board. So Alireza takes the bishop. He now goes g6 here. He again does not want to hang this pawn, so he plays g6, and now we get to move pawn to h3. After h3, Alireza plays queen d7. We get queen to e2, and now we have the move rook to g8 being played. Now what you will have noticed about this position here is that Alireza is unable to really develop his king or his rooks here, so he's just trying to play moves and keep the game going. So we get b3. Alireza plays knight to a5, and now we get to move bishop to b2, fianchettoing the bishop and guarding the knight. Alireza plays knight c6, and here we get knight to f3, and white is actually substantially better because the king is bad, the bishops aren't active, and white has great play here in the center of the board. So we get queen c7. We have queen to f2. Alireza plays knight to b4 here, trying to reopen this diagonal and put pressure on the c file here. And now we get to move rook to d4. Now in this position, Alireza plays this move d5, and this move is a fatal error in the game. Now when I saw this live, I was like, okay, white's probably better if you find the correct line. I didn't really expect Sina move ahead to find it, but as you can tell from his name, he obviously can see a move ahead. So he takes, we get knight takes pawn here. If black were to play bishop c5 here, after knight to e4, bishop takes rook here, knight takes bishop, there's suddenly all these threats of forks, and if black were to take with the knight, There's the move bishop to a3, threatening knight d6, and I think after rook d8 there's c4 here. There simply are too many weaknesses for black. This king is about to get annihilated. So Alireza decides instead to take. We got knight takes knight, bishop takes, and this is where Sina Movahed plays the all-star move of the game. He sacks the rook with rook takes bishop, pawn takes, and he plays the move rook to e1, pinning the bishop and the king on this open e-file. Now at this point, Alireza is completely lost in the game. Queen takes c2 is probably the best attempt to try and keep it going, but after the move queen takes b6, for example, king to f8, and then queen takes a6, white is better. There's also queen takes h4, I believe, here, and after g5, queen g4 here, hitting the rook. You have bishop to f6, you have rook to c1. So many different ideas exist here, and white is just winning the game. Alireza decides instead to play the move king to f8, and now we got this great move knight to g5, threatening to go knight h7 and knight to f6 to hit this king on the back rank. At this point, Alireza is just completely cooked. So we got bishop takes knight, pawn takes bishop, and Alireza plays the move rook g7, trying to give up the rook and move his king to safety. Now, if Alireza were to play a move like queen to g3, for example, here, white can simply go bishop to a3, king to g7, and now after queen f6 and king h7, there's a crushing move rook to e7, hitting the pawn, rook g7, and now white goes bishop b2, reactivating the double A battery. And at this point, after black plays rook g8, white can simply take the pawn. Actually, sorry, white doesn't take the pawn, my mistake. White can play bishop d4 first here, because if white were to take the pawn, there's actually an attempt to make a draw with the yo-yo check between g3 and e1. So in this position, what you would do is you would actually play the move bishop to d4 first here, and black is completely stuck. This is what we call Zugzwang, meaning that if you move your queen away, now I take, because there's no check. And if you move a rook away, I just take the rook. If you move your king back, I can simply go queen takes pawn, as the pin will play. So you can't really move any of your pieces. And after b5, takes, and now the move b4 here. This is complete Zugzwang. Black cannot move any of the pieces, and the game will end in a sec. So Alireza goes rook g7. Now we get bishop takes rook, king takes, queen to f6, and here Alireza resigns the game, because if he were to go king to f8, there's queen h8, checkmating the king, and after king to g8, rook to e7 with the classic kebab on the 7th rank. You move the queen anywhere, I take, and it's checkmate in 1. And if you give up the queen, obviously a queen is worth more than a rook, and white will win the game. So a very, very impressive win from the 15-year-old Sina Movahed from Iran. A great game from him from start to finish, showing why he truly belongs in this tournament and why he's had so many great performances online, including Title Tuesday. So after this loss, this pretty much dooms Alireza's chance of winning the tournament with only a few rounds left, but nonetheless, life goes on. So now we're going to talk about another player, and this player, of course, is going to be the future first American world champion, Hans Niemann. Now, Hans got off to a very slow start as well, much like Alireza, with a couple of draws on the first day, but he has not played the top players. And one of the things is, when you're not playing the top players, you get a few easier pairings. It gives you a chance to get into the groove and start racking up some wins before you play the big dogs. So we are going to pick it up in the 8th round. We're going to pick it up in the 8th round of this tournament. Hans is going into this game with 5.5 points out of 7 here. He's coming off a big win in the first round of the day. And here we have him playing against Quang Liem from Vietnam, who is a former World Blitz champion. So Hans opens with e4. We get e5, knight f3, knight c6, and now we get bishop b5, a6, bishop a4. All these moves are normal. This is what is known as the classic open Spanish, and both the players are simply blitzing out all these moves very quickly. Now you'll notice all standard theory so far. We get f5, takes, and now we get the move rook to e1. Here we have the move bishop f5 being played by Quang, and already it's a question of whether this was actually prep or a mistake, because in this position you can tell that the computer gives white a very tiny advantage, but it is nothing substantial, whereas after bishop to f5 is played, the evaluation jumps quite a bit. Hans trades the bishops, goes knight to f1 here, opening up the diagonal for this dark square bishop, while also having the potential to move this knight to either e3 or g3. We get queen to d7. Hans plays bishop g5 here. We get rook d8, and now we have the move knight to e3 as white tries to put more pressure on the central pawn here. So in this position, Quang plays king to h8, and now we get queen to c2. And already here, through really basic moves, Hans has obtained a very, very big advantage here, because black has this huge problem with his pawn on d5, and also these knights have great squares to jump in the center of the board. So Quang plays h6. We get bishop to h4, we get knight to g8, and now the very natural move knight to g4 as white tries to use these knights and hit this very critical g6 square to fork the king and the rook. We get rook takes f3. This is a move that I think is a bit of panic from Quang here, feeling a lot of pressure. Probably bishop takes h4 is better, followed by knight to e7. But after rook d1 and queen d6 here, and a move like rook d2 with the intention of a double stack on the e file here, and D's knight so well placed here, it is very, very tough to play. So Quang decides to sack the rook with rook takes knight. We get the trade, pawn takes rook, and now we have the move rook to f8. Now here Hans plays the move rook d1. This is actually a very, very important move to play here, because in this position it'd be very easy to play a move like queen to d1, trying to guard the pawn. But after knight g6, suddenly the black knight is jumping every which way here, and this white king is actually in serious danger. So we get rook d1. Quang plays rook to f5, and now we get to move pawn to f4. Now this is maybe not the best move according to the computer. It wants this very strange move, queen to e4, to go queen e6 and guarding the pawn. Black takes, you take the queen, and with a rook for a pony, white will win the game. But f4, very logical, very reasonable as well. We get rook takes pawn, and now Hans slides the queen over to e2 here, with the idea of potentially putting pressure on this knight. Meanwhile, the rooks are perfectly placed here in this position, and it's really going to take a bit of a miracle for black to not lose the game. So we get pawn to h5. Hans plays knight to e5. h5 is simply a blunder which loses the game, but it's understandable here to play this move, because to play something like queen to f5 here, allowing white to bring a rook up or play something like queen to e6 simply isn't supernatural here. So h5 does make some sense, but tactically this move loses on the spot. Now the reason this move loses is because Hans plays knight e5, we get queen takes pawn, and on first glance you're like, wow, the rook's coming to g4, rook g4, rook h4, the king's getting mated. But it simply isn't working out. So we get rook to d3. Quang plays queen h4, we get knight takes knight, and here we get the move knight takes knight. Now if black were to play rook g4 in this position, the very important point behind this is that white can sack the queen. Queen takes rook g3, and now the rook is guarded while attacking the queen, and the knight is also hanging on e7. So when you move your queen away and I have two rooks and a pony for the queen, and white will win the game very easily. So that's why Quang takes the knight. But now after queen to e8 check, king h7, there's the all-star move rook to g3 here, not queen takes c6, because then there would be queen f2, rook h4 check, rook h3, and after rook takes rook, this would be gg, why not? But after rook to g3 is played here, now suddenly in this position, the knight is under attack. There's a threat of queen g6 and mate, like knight a5 check and mate. So black simply cannot hold the position together. Quang plays rook g4. Now we get to move rook e to e3. Very important move to guarding the rook. At this point, the game is over. We get knight to a5. Here, Hans plays queen to e5. We get king h6, queen to e6, g6, and now we get to move queen f7. Here, Quang plays queen to d8. This is a move designed simply to stop the checkmate threat with queen f8. Say you go knight c4, for example, queen f8, king h7, there's rook e7. And if you go king g5, there's a very cute move f4 here, checkmating the black king. You can't take with the rook due to the pin. King has no squares, and that's GG as well. So we get queen d8. Hans trades the rooks, plays rook to e7 here, creating the double stack on the 7th rank. Here, Quang plays knight c6. We get queen to f4, and at this point, Quang resigns the game as it's a forced checkmate. After king h5, there's rook h7 mate, and if you go g5, queen f6, king h5, there's once again rook to h7, and the king has no squares available. So with this win, this vaulted Hans up to the top of the leaderboard with 6.5 points out of 8. He would go on to win in the 9th round with the black piece against Alexander Shimanov from Russia, meaning that at the end of day 2 of the World Rapid and Blitz, there are 2 players tied for the lead with 7.5 points out of 9, and those players are Vladislav Artamyev and Hans Niemann. Now a half point behind, we have Magnus Carlsen, Norbek Abdustorov, I believe Gukesh is there as well. So there are a lot of players half point behind, but with 4 rounds remaining, it's anybody's guess how the event will end, but it will be a very exciting finish tomorrow. So on that note, I hope you guys have enjoyed my recap from the second day of the FIDE World Rapid and Blitz Championship being held in Doha, Qatar. If you are not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we'll be back with a recap tomorrow once we find out who the winner is of the 2025 World Rapid Chess Championship. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you very soon. See you guys. Bye.